Very simple daf. Today's daf is Masechta Bava Kamma daf Kuf Aleph. We're starting from Kuf Amud Beis by the Mishnah, so we can just get everything in. Okay. Starting by the Mishnah. A very simple Mishnah. Hanoisein tzema letzabor. Someone gives a wool to a dyer, and the dyer burnt the wool, which is common because you had to put the wool in a hot pot full of dye, and he burnt the wool. So it's almost like if you give your suit to a cleaners and he destroyed your suit. So so the dyer has to pay back the amount of wool that was lost. That makes perfect sense. He did a bad job. He did an inferior job of dyeing the wool. It didn't come out right. So then he gives back the wool, and the owner of the wool has to pay the dyer for his services, but he pays him a discount. If now the appreciation of the wool is worth more than the expenses that the dyer put into the wool. So, for example, if the wool went up by 10 dinrim, and the expenses were 3 dinrim, the amount of dye that went into this wool was 3. You pay him for the expense, but not more. And if sometimes it could be opposite. He put too much dye into the wool, and he has more expenses than the actual appreciation of the wool. So then, you give him the appreciation, but not the expenses. Basically, you're getting a discount for the mess up job that the dyer did. Okay, now the third case of the Mishnah is he gave him instructions. I want you to dye it red. And the dyer, by accident, dyed it black. Or shachar, he was told instructions to dye it black, and he dyed it red. So he's an accidental ganaf. That's what it is, because he changed the wool. Now the owner doesn't want this, or he really doesn't want this wool. He wanted it a different color. So Rav Meir says that the dyer owns now the wool, and and he pays back the wool. He just pays him the amount of wool as if there's no dye on it. So he gives money back to the original owner. Rabbi Yehuda says there's no such a thing of an accidental ganaf. Even if you made a shino, you changed around the wool. So he holds that you give back the wool with the wrong color on it, and the owner of the wool, has to pay something for the dye that's on his wool. If the appreciation is more than the expenses, the owner of the wool will give him the expenses. But if the expenses are more than the appreciation, you give him the appreciation. Basically, the owner of the wool still has to pay for the wool because he's getting his wool returned, albeit with the wrong color on it, but he still has to pay something for it. Rameya says, no, the dyer, because he messed up, is it like an accidental ganaf, and he owns that wool, and all he has to do is pay for the wool. So the Gemara says, in the second case, it uses this expression ku'ur. What does this word ku'ur mean? We know, I explained it to me, he messed up. He did a botched job of dyeing it the right color, but it's not what the owner wanted. It's not to the quality that the owner wanted. So the Gemara says, my ku'ur. What is the meaning of this word ku'ur? Amar Rab Nachman, Amar Rab Baba, Chana kalabus. It means kalabus. My kalabus. What is the meaning of the word kalabus? Amar Rabba Bar Shmuel. We go to Kuf Aleph Amar Aleph. It means kafra dudi. It means he used the sediments, the dye that's in the bottom of the pot. In other words, the leftover dye in the pot he used to dye this wool, and therefore it came out inferior dye. That's what ku'ur or means. Tanur same idea. Hanoisin eitzin lecharish. Someone gives wood to a carpenter. Lasis mem kise. He told him, make me a chair with my wood. Also mem safsal. But the carpenter didn't take down the order right, and he made a safsal, which is a bench. Let's say the order was safsal, make a bench. Vasem mem kise, and he made a chair. So the carpenter again messed up, and he messed up and did the wrong order. So Rav Meir says that the carpenter keeps the item, And Noisin Lloyd the Me'etzav, and he pays for the wood that he messed up with. So he gives him the wood, the amount of money of wood that he got from the customer. Rabbi Yehuda says, Im hashevach yasali yitzia, if you return the chair, the bench, even though it's the wrong order, to the owner of the wood, and he has to pay a little bit for now turning his wood into a usable item, and he'll say, Im hashavach, if the expenses, if the appreciation is more than the expenses, then you pay for the expenses. If the expenses are more than the appreciation, then the owner of the wood will pay just for the appreciation. So Rameh would agree that if the carpenter didn't make a mistake, but he made an inferior job. That's what we learned in the Mishnah. You give wood to a carpenter to make a beautiful chair, and he made an inferior chair. Safsel, you gave him instruction to make safsel a beautiful bench. And he made an inferior bench. So in that case, you followed the instructions of the owner of the wood, but you did an inferior job. So you return the inferior job back to the owner of the wood, and the owner of the wood has to pay a discounted price. Or he just, either he pays for the expenses, but if the appreciation is less than the expenses, so you pay, then you just pay for the appreciation, but you don't give him the higher amount. Okay. Now the Gemara asks a question. Here comes a question. Yesh shevach samonim al tzamer. When let's say I paint a room, is paint or dye on something, or dye on the wool, is that substantive? Is there something there, or are you just looking at color? Or there is no shevach al tzamer. What does that mean? There's nothing substantive over there. It's just you're looking at color, but there's nothing there. Now, what would be the nafkamina? Hey Shadami, what's your question? Why are you asking this question? And what am I supposed to? What halacha question can I derive from your theoretical question? Let us say a case. The gazel samanim, a man stole herbs, right? Dye herbs. V'dakinu, and then he crushed them. Usranhu, and he soaked them in water and turned them into dye. V'tzava behem, and then he dyed, let's say, his wool with them. So he stole items and made it into dye. So what do you mean? He shouldn't have to pay? He didn't steal anything. He acquired those herbs, that dye, because he changed it from a herb into a dye. So it's his. He stole something substantive, and therefore he has to pay back. My question is a little bit different. The gazel samonim shruyim utzavabu. Oh, he stole already made dye, like say already made paint, and he colored it. So this would be my question. You dyed your wool, right? So is there something substantive on does the dye, is it a substantive something which is on the wall? It's like something there on the wall. The amalei, that he could say, Havli samonin dishaklitinu, the victim that got his dye stolen could say, give me back that dye that's on your wool. Dilma, or maybe ein shavach samon al gabitzemer. We look at it, there's nothing substantive on the wool. There's nothing there. Damalei, so the guy that took the dye, I don't have to pay you anything, because look, there's nothing there. Amre, so the yeshiva asked, that doesn't make sense. The ein shavach samon al gabitzemer. If there is nothing there, nothing on the wool, it's just a dye, a color that's on the wool. So mi matze amale leislach lagabe v'lamidi. Can the person who stole the dye can say, I didn't steal anything? Namely, the victim can say, Havli samoni da'afsid disinhu. You destroyed my paint. You destroyed my dye. I had good dye that I could have colored my own wool, and now that you took it from me, you caused me a loss. So where would be what you're talking about? Is the dye something substantive or not? So you look at it this way. Do you say there's nothing substantive on the wool and he has to pay for it? Or maybe the guy that stole the dye and dyed his own wool with it, right? We say there's something there on his wool. And so the guy that stole the dye could say to the person who owns the dye, the dye is right there. Shaklinu, take it off my sweater, take it off my wool. That's all. So take it back. So the Gemara says, Shaklinu, how could he take it back? B'mai shakli, with what could he take it off? How could he remove the dye that's on the wall? B'tzafon, with soap, tzafon avuri maver, hashava loy ovid. It may be able to, take off the dye, but it doesn't return the dye back to its original owner. So finally, the Gemara gives you what the question is. Here we're discussing. You stole wool and dye belonging to one person. Okay, a man had wool and dye and a paint, let's say, and wool, and you stole it. And the guy that stole it took the dye and dyed the wool with it. Now now he's returning the dyed wool. So now, did he return the dye? He's definitely returning the wool, but did he return the dye? If there's something substantive of dye on top of its wool, it's not something invisible. Then he is exactly returning the wool with the dye. So he is mekayim the mitzvah of hashavas gezela. Or maybe ein shavach someone there is no substantive dye on the wall. So therefore, what did he return to the victim? He only returned the wool. He didn't return any of the dye. Amre, so the yeshiva boys asked, okay, but he did give him an enhanced wool that has now a dye in it. Even if you say that there is nothing of dye that he returned, but he gave him a better wool, so that should be enough to pay for the dye that he stole. That the wool increased its value because now it has a color on it. Like tzricha, it's different. The zal tziva, the colored garments, colored wool is worth less than having wool and dye. For example, a car might be worth less than if you strip it down to its parts. So therefore, what he's saying is that the victim is saying, I had wool and I had dye. I could have sold the dye separately and made more money. Now that you took my dye and my wool and combined them together, you actually caused me a loss. So if you say yesh shevach someone else the dye is on top of the wool, so he actually, when he returned the wool, he's returning the dye. Or you can say once the dye is in the wool, then there's nothing there anymore. You're only returning wool, but not a dye. The if you want, I can tell you. Or he didn't dye the wool. He took the dye. A man stole dye from colored dye, and he colored a monkey with it. Well, and then he gives the guy the monkey. So did you return him anything? You could say the dye is on the monkey, so I gave you your dye back. Or maybe there's nothing there on the monkey, although it's a different color monkey, but you actually didn't return him anything. Ravina gives you another scenario where this question will be relevant. Here we're discussing the wool belonged to one person and the dye belonged to one person. Okay, and we're not talking about Geneva over here. A guy, two people, one had wool, one had a dye. The Ka'ase and Curious George, okay, call him the monkey, came, and he took the dye and colored the other guy's wool. So there's no Ganef over here. It's the monkey that took the dye and colored the wool. So now the guy with the wool has dye that doesn't belong to him. Does he have the dye? Does he have some substantive dye on his wool? The Amalei, so the guy who owned the dye, who got it taken from him, Havli Samoni the Gabachnino, give me back my dye or pay for it. Dilma, or maybe Ein Shevach Samon Gabe Tzemer. There is no substantive dye on top of this wool. It has a color, but there's no dye there. The Amalei, and the owner of the wool could say, Leislach Legabach Klum, I don't owe you anything. So again, the Gemara's question is like theoretically, when you look at color, is there something substantive there, or it's just like Newton said, it's just a reflection of light, but there's nothing there. Tashma, come in here. Beged shitzavoy beklipa arlam. A man colored his clothing with now you know arla you can't benefit from the peels of arla, from the peels of a fruit of an arla tree. So what should you do with the beged that absorbed the color of this arla fruit? You burn the beged because you're not allowed to benefit from it. Alma, so we see from there, chazusa milsi, that vision is something. A color on an item of clothing is something substantive, and it's almost like the beged now has arla on it, and therefore you have to burn it. So perfectly makes sense. Rava say no. Arla is different. Arla is the Torah gives you a separate isser that even though this item site is worth nothing, you have to burn it. The Torah gave an isser for any benefit that you could see with your eyes. Arla is not only also to be eaten, also to be benefit. You're not allowed to even have a benefit with your eyes. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, arelim lo ye'achel. You're not allowed to eat arla. Ainli ela is achila. I only know you're not allowed to eat arla fruit. Menayim shlo yehena mimenu. How do you know you're not allowed to benefit from it? V'la yitzba, or you're not allowed to color with it. V'la yadlik boyas in there, and you can't light a lamp with it with arla. A couple extra words, Rabbi says kulam, to include you're not allowed to color with it. So arla, you're not allowed to color with it. So makes perfect sense, and therefore it's the Torah answered. So therefore you can't learn it anywhere else. Really, color is nothing there. There's nothing there by color. Tashma, come in here. Beged shetzvoi beklipe shvias. Beged that was colored with the peels of shmita fruit. Okay, shmita fruit has to be burnt at a certain time. Also, you're not allowed to keep it around forever. So the beged got colored with the fruits of shmita. You have to burn the beged. You have to burn the item of clothing. So you see that there's something substantive on the clothing. It has the color of shmita fruit. So you see, color is something there. And says Gemara, Shana Hasam, also by Shemitah, the Torah gave you an extra Isser, that even though really nothing is there, but Al Makra, the Torah says, Tia Bav Yasete. The Torah says that Shemitah fruit, even though when it's not there, we consider it as if it is there. It always is considered there. So even if the Shemitah fruit turned into a color dye, which is now dyed into an item of clothing, you would have to burn the item of clothing, but that does not apply in Kala Tarakula. It only applies by Shemitah. Now we go to Chuf Aleph on the base. Rava Rami. Rava has the contradiction. Again, same idea, same story over here. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Beged shetzvoi beklipa arla. A beged that was colored with the peels of an arla tree. So the arla fruit colored the item of clothing. You burn the item of clothing. Alma, so we see from there, chazusa milsehi, that the color is something. There's something on this item of clothing, blue, red, orange, doesn't matter, and therefore it's almost like you have arla there, real live arla. Therefore, you're not allowed to benefit from it. You have to burn it. Or a minu, but then I'll ask you a stira. We know that, let's say, 4 ounces of human blood is like having a dead body in a room, and it's metama ba'oil. What happens? Revias dam, you have 4 ounces of human blood, shenivla ababayis, that got swallowed into in a room in a house. Habayis tame. Anything in that room is tame. The Amrila, but another brisa says habayis tar. Whatever's in that room remains tar. How do you reconcile those two brises? It doesn't make a difference. It's not a machlekes. Before the blood got absorbed into the ground and swallowed into the ground, so any item, any kalim that was in that room while the blood was still, before it got swallowed into the ground, remains tamei. Ha, the kalim the asub soif. But if after the blood got swallowed up into the ground, you brought in kalim into that room, those kalim remain tar. Fine. But here's the point. Let's say you have human blood, nivlu b'ksus, that got swallowed up into a item of clothing. Right. If you could squeeze out the item of clothing and 4 ounces of human blood could come out of it, tameya, because then the whole room is tamei, because you have really you have 4 ounces of human blood in that room. Vimla, but if you can't squeeze it out, even though the item of clothing remains red, but still you can't squeeze out actual blood from that item of clothing, tahira, the whole room remains tar. So we see from this brisa, just that by having the color, it doesn't mean you have the actual item there. You have the color red, but you don't have, it's not considered blood. And you just told me that when it comes to Arla, you see that that it is considered as if Orla is on the clothing because you have to burn it. So how do you reconcile those two brises? Rav Kahana said the blood really item of color is substantive. But by blood, we're talking about human blood that's tamei midrabanan. How do you have human blood that's tamei midrabanan? Amar Rav Kahana mekuli reviyas shanu. We're talking about the leniencies of human blood, bedam tvusa, with blood of some submissive blood, drabanan. In other words, a guy that was murdered, right? And you have the blood on the floor, but some of the blood came out when he was alive. Live human blood is not matame, a room, only if it comes from a dead body. So you have a mixture of, you don't know if it's really dam from a dead person or dam from a live person. So, and it would be tar. So this whole Indian is the Rabbanan. Anyway, that's why we say if it got swallowed into an item of clothing, if you can't extract a revius dam from that item of clothing, it will go with Rabbanan and say, even though the item of clothing remains red, the whole room will remain tar. Okay, Rava asked the stira. Tanam, we learned in the Mishnah, Memin Hatsoivim. These are stuff that you use to dye, right? So Sviche Sotim V'Koitzim. This is the reed leaves of wood and safflower. Okay, that's what it is. So these things that grew by itself on Shemitah, and these are types of dyes. Yesh lehem shvius, l'dmeim shvius. They have a din Shemitah on them. Yesh lehem beer, l'dmeim beer. They're really treated like an apple of Shemitah, and you have to get rid of it during the time of beer, getting rid of the Shemitah fruit. And their value, and if you exchange it for money, you have to get rid of that money. So really, you see from there, Alma, from this Mishnah, you'll see eitzim, regular wood, yesh behem kedusha shvias, that is holy, it has a din of Shemitah. Not only fruits are Shemitah, but even a piece of wood, albeit these are dyes, these are useful woods, has a din of the holiness of Shemitah. Reminu, I will ask you a stira. Ale kanim, reed wood, ba'ale gefanim, the vine wood from a vine tree. Shegivim bechava al pnei asada, and you collected it bechava al pnei asada on the field, right? You put it in a storage on the field. It depends. Likten lachil, if you plan to eat that vine, those vine reeds, yesh behem kedusha shvius. But if you plan to use it as firewood, ein behem shusha shvius, then there's no holy shvius on it. Grapes, of course, have shmita kedusha, but the wood from a vine tree, if you don't eat it, if you're not going to use it as food, if you're just going to use it as firewood, then it has no holiness of shmita. So you see that wood has no holiness of shmita, and then you said by dye plants, it has a kedusha shvius, even though it's also a type of wood, not a food item. Umashani, so Rava answered like this. Amakra, the Torah says like this. What is considered something that has Shemitah holiness on it? La'achla, something that you can eat. What defines a fruit? A food is bi shahanasa ubiyara shavim. When you're benefiting it and when you're destroying it, it happens at the same time. When you eat the fruit, you're destroying it, but at the same time, you're benefiting it. Yatsu eitzim, but wood is not considered Shemitah holiness because Shahanasan Acha Bi'urim. Because when do you benefit from wood? After you burn it. When you burn it and you get rid of the wood, you turn it into a coal, then it becomes a useful item. So therefore, it is not included into the Kedusha of Shvius. But that's normal wood. But the dye wood, the dye plants, when you're burning it, a dye comes out. So at the same time that you're burning it, you're benefiting from it. So it's more similar to an actual fruit of Shemitah, and that's why in that Svichei Sotem Mekaitzem, that's why they have a Kedusha Shvius as opposed to the regular wood from a vine tree. Says the Gemara, V'ika Eitzim Damashcham Dahanason Ubiran Shavim, but there's some type of oil wood that as soon as you burn it, you're benefiting. It lights up. Let's say there's certain types of wood that light up as soon as you burn it. So that wood should have Kedusha Shvius. So Amarava, so why do we say that Eitzim Demishchan, oily wood, does not have a Kedusha Shemitah? It's very similar to a fruit. Amarava, Rav explained, we go to Amar Beis, Stam Eitzim Lahasakaninu. Most woods are burnt, are turned into coal and not to illuminate. And therefore, they're considered to be wood. But Svichei Sotim, most of them, of course, are used to dye. Therefore, there's Kedusha on it, and therefore it has Kedusha Shvius, even if you burn it. And but alikonim and aligafonim, some people eat it, some people burn with it. So therefore, we go after the thought process of the person who collected it. Okay, we'll continue more with this sugya tomorrow, Be'ezus Hashem. Good night.